Most people think Dale Farm happened because travellers broke the rules, but that's only half the story. The reality is that this case became one of the biggest planning battles in modern Britain because of a combination of planning law, greenbelt protection, visibility and scale. In this video we'll look at what actually happened, why the courts ultimately upheld enforcement, and what lessons anyone considering off-grid or traveller living can learn from it. By the end you'll see also why this marks the conclusion of Chapter 3. Living on the road, waterways are off-grid in the UK. Dickie Dread. And this is the final part in Chapter 3, Living on the Land and Water, Parking Up and Planning Reality, and it's part 32 in the video series. And this is the fifth in a number of case studies using the information we've already covered in the chapter, and this is another real one, Dale Farm. Then we'll close Chapter 3 with a few general remarks. So, case study, Dale Farm. Dale Farm, near Basildon, became one of the most high-profile planning enforcement cases involving traveller communities in the UK. Unlike TP Valley, which evolved gradually in relative obscurity, Dale Farm moved quickly into visibility and conflict. The site developed over time on land partly designated as a lawful traveller site and partly as unauthorised development on greenbelt land. As more families moved on to the unauthorised section, hard standings, caravans and associated infrastructure were established without planning permission. From a legal perspective, the key issues were straightforward: change of use to residential without permission, development within the greenbelt, and a breach of planning control. Over a number of years, the local authority, Basildon Borough Council, issued enforcement notices requiring the removal of unauthorised structures and occupation. These notices were challenged through appeals and legal action, extending the timeline but not ultimately changing the outcome. In 2011, enforcement was carried out on a large scale, involving eviction, clearance of structures and significant police presence. The operation drew national attention, became a focal point of debates around planning law, traveller rights and proportionality of enforcement. What this illustrates. Set along TP Valley, Dale Farm highlights a different trajectory within the planning system. Scale accelerates enforcement. As occupation expands and infrastructure becomes more permanent, the likelihood of enforcement increases. Large, visible sites are difficult to ignore. Planning status is decisive. Where development clearly falls outside planning use, particularly in protected areas such as greenbelt land, legal challenges tend to narrow rather than resolve the issue. Delay is not resolution. Appeals and legal processes can extend timelines significantly, sometimes for years, but they do not necessarily change the underlying planning position. Visibility brings multiple agencies. Once a site reaches a certain threshold, enforcement is no longer just a planning matter. It can involve police, courts and coordinated operations. The limits of the example. As with TP Valley, the case should not be treated as universally representative. Reflects a specific legal context, including greenbelt designation and long-running disputes with local authority. However, it does demonstrate how quickly informal or unauthorised occupation can move from tolerated presence to full enforcement once it crosses certain thresholds of scale, permanence and visibility. So, the hybrid reality most people live. In practice, most people do not choose exclusively between road and land. They combine both. Land provides a base, but movement remains part of the system. Vehicles provide flexibility, fallback and mobility. The hybrid approach allows people to manage risk and adapt to changing circumstances. Some combine road, land and water, moving between vehicles and boats depending on season, cost and enforcement pressure. Final reality. Across both road, land and water, the same underlying principle applies. The system is not defined solely by law, but by how law, perception and response interact. There is no single correct way to navigate it, only a series of decisions about how visible to be, how permanent to become, and how much risk to accept. For those who understand these dynamics, it is possible to build a way of living that, while never entirely secure, is sustainable over time. And for most people, that is enough. The Dale Farm case reminds us that there is rarely a single moment when everything changes. Instead, a series of small decisions gradually create a pattern that planning authorities, courts, and eventually other agencies begin to recognise. As visibility, permanence and scale increase, so does the likelihood of enforcement. If you're trying to live differently, this isn't just about planning permission. It's about understanding how the system actually works before discovering it the hard way. That brings us to the end of Chapter 3. We've explored how movement, land ownership, planning law and real-world case studies interact to shape life on the road, on the land and on the waterways. The common thread has been simple. Outcomes are shaped not just by the law itself, but by visibility, pattern and response. In the next chapter we'll leave planning law behind and look at driving and navigation law. Because even if you've found somewhere to live, you still have to get there legally. And today's enforcement systems work very differently from the ones many people remember, the good old days. So we're now going to move on to Chapter 4, Driving and Navigation Laws. And we will cover in the next video licence categories and what you can actually drive.